You'll think you know what sort of woman speaks like this. Old, harmless, made of shawls and prayers. But if you were sitting where you are now, close enough to hear my breath catch, you would learn a different thing. There are nights a person lives through only by becoming someone she cannot bear to remember. My name is Elspeth Crowley. I was born in the year 1839 in a low valley where the river ran brown after rain and the fields never quite forgave the stones. I am, as I tell you, an old woman now, so old my hands sometimes forget what they're holding, and the names of birds slip away even while I'm listening to them. Yet there is one set of minutes I can still count as if they were coins laid in my palm. I do not even have to try. They come, unasked, when the room is quiet. I've carried a particular sentence in my mouth for most of my life. It has bruised my tongue without ever being spoken. I waited through seasons, through births and funerals, through the years when my hair still had color and the years when it turned the shade of ash. I waited because I was frightened, yes, but also because I told myself that silence could be a kind of righteousness, like keeping a door shut in a storm. I'm not sure I believe that anymore. You deserve one thing at the outset. I'm not telling you this to be pitied. I'm telling you because the weight of it has started to change shape. It has begun to feel less like a punishment and more like a warning I was meant to pass along before I am gone. Let me place you with me properly. I'm speaking from a small room that smells of boiled linens and lamp oil. The walls are thin. I can hear the house settling, a soft creak now and then like an old knee. Outside, a wagon rattles past on the road and the sound fades. I keep my chair near the window because I like the honest light. My eyes are not what they were, but the light helps me remember that the world is still made of ordinary things. I will not dress my act in fine words. On one night, long ago, I set something into another person's food that I knew did not belong there. I did it on purpose. I did it with my face composed and my voice steady. And then I watched the slow work of it, and I did not call anyone for help. If you expect me to say I was mad or drunk or out of my senses, I cannot give you that comfort. I was in my senses. That is part of what has made my sleep so thin these many years. The story does not begin with the poison. It begins with work, always work. It begins with a kitchen that never cooled in summer and never warmed in winter, with water hauled until your shoulders learned a permanent ache, with bread kneaded until your wrists were stiff as boards. It begins with a girl who learned early that a woman's body could be treated like a tool, useful, replaceable, and blamed when it broke. My father farmed leased land, which is a polite way of saying he bent his back for another man's profit. When the crops were good, we ate well enough. When they were not, we made a thin stew and pretended it filled us. My mother's face had a look that never left it, half watchfulness, half apology, like she was forever bracing for someone to accuse her of failing. I adored her and resented her in equal measure, though I didn't have the words for either feeling at the time. There was a man who owned much of what we touched, fields, barns, even the store where we bought salt and lamp wicks. His name was Silas Marorrow. I will tell you that name once, plainly, and after that I may call him only Marorrow, because saying it too often feels like letting him into the room. Marorrow was not a stranger to our doorstep. He came when rent was due, or when a pig was sold, or when my father needed seed on credit. He came with boots that stayed clean no matter the weather, and with a smile that never warmed his eyes. He would stand in our kitchen as if he belonged there, taking in the cracked plates, the patched elbows, the way my mother's hands shook when she poured his coffee. He liked to be served. He liked to be listened to. And he liked, most of all, the knowledge that we could not refuse him. You must understand something about my father. He was not cruel in the way some men are. He did not beat us for sport. But he had a quiet fury in him, a kind that settles deep and comes out as sharp words in long silences. He hated owing anyone, yet he owed Marorrow, and that ate him from the inside like rust. When Marorrow spoke, my father's jaw would work as if he were chewing stones. After Marorrow left, my father's anger would fall on the rest of us, because anger has to land somewhere. I was the eldest surviving child. There had been another before me, a boy who lived only a short while, and then me, and then two little sisters. That meant I learned to keep small bodies clean, to hush cries before they reached my father's ears, to mend cloth until the stitches made my fingertips raw. It also meant I learned early that a girl can become a buffer between a man's pride and a family's need. Now and then, I would catch Marorrow looking at me in a way that made my skin feel too tight, not the way men looked at my mother, with ownership already claimed, not the way they looked at my sisters, who were still mostly elbows and laughter. His gaze at me was like measuring cloth for a dress, assessing, imagining, deciding what could be cut and taken. I tell you this not to paint him as a monster out of storybooks. He was, in the daylight of the world, respectable. He sat in church on Sundays. He gave a few coins to the preacher for the poor. He spoke with those careful manners that make other people step aside. If you met him in town, you might have tipped your hat, and that is what made the danger so slippery. Evil does not always arrive with a snarl. Sometimes it comes with polished boots and a clean handkerchief. There was an evening, years before the night I am confessing, that lodged in me like a splinter. It was late autumn. The air smelled of wet leaves and smoke. My mother had made a pot of beans and a pan of cornbread, stretching what little we had into something that looked like a meal. Marorrow arrived near dusk, when the last light was turning the window glass the color of old pewter. He took off his hat and held it as if it were part of his body. He spoke softly, almost kindly, about the debt, about patience, about how he did not wish to be hard, but hard measures were sometimes necessary. My father stood with his hands at his sides, motionless, as if moving would show weakness. And then Marorrow's eyes slid to me. "Your girl is growing," he said, like he was remarking on the weather. "Strong, able, a blessing in a household." My mother's spoon paused mid-stir. My sister stopped chewing. I felt heat climb up my neck, not from pride, but from a sense of being put on display. My father made a sound that might have been agreement, or might have been a warning. Marorrow continued, still gentle. "There are ways," he said, "to settle accounts besides coin." That sentence, so mild, so almost reasonable, was the first door that opened. I did not understand all of it then, but I understood enough to feel my stomach turn. If you are wondering why we did not simply leave, I will answer you plainly. People speak of leaving as if it is a matter of walking down the road with your bundle. But we were tied by more than rope, by winter, by poverty, by the knowledge that the next valley was full of the same men with the same ledgers. Leaving without money is not freedom. It is only new hunger with different scenery. I remember looking at my mother that night, searching her face for some signal, some promise that she would never let that sentence become a bargain. Her eyes met mine for the briefest moment, and in them I saw something I had never seen before. Calculation, not coldness, not betrayal. Desperation measured out like flour. That is when I learned that love does not always protect. Sometimes it negotiates. I will stop here for the moment while the thread is still intact in your mind. Because the next part is where the ordinary turns, quietly, almost politely, toward the thing I did. After that evening, the house did not look different, yet everything in it had shifted a finger's width out of true. The table was the same scarred plank. The kettle still sang when it boiled. My sisters still squabbled over the same cracked doll. But my mother began to keep our accounts in her head with a tightness around the eyes, and my father grew quieter, which is another way men sometimes prepare for a storm. They stop speaking so the thunder will not hear them. I was not a fanciful girl. I did not sit dreaming at windows, nor did I expect a rescue to come over the hill. I knew what we were, tenants, owing rent and owing gratitude and owing our very right to stand on that soil. Yet I also had a stubborn thread in me. I wanted, with a childish fierceness, to belong to myself. That desire was small, like a seed, but it was alive. Marorrow began to call more often, always with a reason that sounded reasonable. He needed a signature. He wanted to check the fence line. He was in the area, as if our valley were a street in town. My mother would wipe her hands on her apron and set out coffee, even when we had little enough for ourselves. Hospitality was a shield in those days. You held it up because it was the only thing you had that looked like dignity. My father took to going out when Marorrow came, as if the barn had suddenly become urgent. That was the worst part, perhaps. The way a man's pride can make him absent when his presence is most needed. I tell you this not to accuse him alone. He was trapped too, but his kind of trapped had boots and a voice. Ours had only bodies. One afternoon, when the air carried the first bite of winter and the sky sat low like a lid, my mother sent me to town with eggs and a small crock of butter. The walk was long, and the road was rutted from wagons. I remember the smell of damp wool from my shawl and the way my fingers went numb around the basket handle. Town was not grand, just a handful of buildings, the store, the smithy, the church. But to me, it felt like a wider world, a place where people's names did not all fit in one head. At the store, I traded our goods for flour and lamp wicks and a little brown sugar, a treat my sisters would lick off their fingers like treasure. While I was waiting for the storekeeper to wrap the sugar in paper, I felt that familiar pressure on the room, like a change in weather. I turned and saw Marorrow at the counter behind me. He greeted me as if we were friends. He asked after my mother's health. He spoke about the cold coming early. Then, as naturally as someone might mention the price of oats, he said, "You're near grown now, Elspeth." I did not answer. I kept my eyes on the storekeeper's hands, on the careful folding of paper, the neat tying of twine. I wanted the conversation to stay in that harmless place among goods and coins. Marorrow leaned slightly closer. I could smell tobacco and something sharper, spirits perhaps, or the bitter scent of his cologne. "A girl like you could earn decent money in a proper house," he said. "I know a family in the next county needs help. A strong girl, clean habits, quiet." It sounded like opportunity. That was the trick of it. He wrapped the hook in velvet. "I can't leave," I said, and my voice surprised me. Steady, not pleading. He smiled a little. "Everyone leaves something," he replied. "Sometimes you leave childhood. Sometimes you leave a debt." When he said debt, his eyes did not flick to the storekeeper or the shelves. They fixed on me as if I were the ledger. On the walk home, the basket felt heavier than it should have. My thoughts kept circling the same point. He was arranging my life as if it were already his to arrange. I told myself I would speak to my mother, that she would put a stop to it. But by the time I reached our lane, I had the old, tired sense that my mother could not stop what she had no power to stop. That evening, I waited until my sisters were asleep and my father had gone out to check the livestock, a task he did too often now, at odd hours. The kitchen was dim, lit by one lamp. My mother sat mending a shirt, her needle moving with a patient, furious rhythm. "He spoke to me in town," I said. The needle paused. My mother's shoulders tightened, as if she had been struck from behind. "What did he say?" she asked, and she kept her eyes on the cloth as though looking at me would make it real. I told her, carefully. I repeated the word house and work and money. I did not repeat his tone, because tone is harder to fight than words. My mother set the shirt in her lap. For a moment, she looked older than she was. "He thinks," she said slowly, "that what he owns includes what grows on his land." "I'm not his," I whispered. It was the first time I had ever spoken that thought aloud. My mother's mouth tightened. "No," she said, and then after a pause that felt like a prayer turning into something else, "but he can make our lives unlivable." There it was, plain as day. Not a threat, not a drama, simply the truth of our position. "Then what do we do?" I asked. My mother's hands began to move again, stitching more quickly now, as if speed could close a wound. "We endure," she said. "We keep our heads low. We give him no excuse." I wanted to shout that excuses were not required, that a man like Marorrow manufactured them like barrels at a cooper's shop. Instead, I said, "He will come again." My mother did not deny it. She only said, "When he does, you do not stand alone with him. Not in the house, not in the yard, not anywhere." I nodded, but I felt a cold certainty settling behind my ribs. Rules are lovely things when the world respects them. The world did not respect ours. In the weeks that followed, I kept close to my mother's skirts like a shadow. If I went to the spring, I took a sister with me. If I fed the chickens, I did it within sight of the kitchen window. I began to notice every creak of the floorboards, every pause in my father's breathing when someone knocked. I learned a new kind of listening, the kind that hears danger in ordinary sounds. And still, Marorrow came. He came one Sunday after church, while my father was still in town speaking with a neighbor. He came smiling, as if calling on a friend. My mother's face went pale the moment she saw him through the window. "Tell your sisters to stay in the back," she murmured to me, without moving her lips much. "And whatever happens, Elspeth, whatever he says, keep your mouth shut unless I speak first." I did as she told me. I ushered my sisters away, my heart beating in my throat. When I returned to the kitchen, Marorrow was already stepping inside, wiping his boots with a care that felt like mockery. My mother poured him coffee with hands that did not shake, which was its own sort of courage. He took the cup, sipped, and looked at me over the rim as if he were tasting me too. "Your mother tells me you're obedient," he said. My mother answered before I could. "My daughter is decent," she said, and her voice had an edge I had rarely heard. Morrow's smile did not falter. "Decency is a fine thing," he said, "when it's directed properly." He set the cup down, and the sound of it on the table, small, ceramic, ordinary, rang in my ears like a bell. Because in that moment I understood that he was not just testing us, he was teaching us. He was showing us how far he could lean before we broke. And as he spoke, smoothly and softly, I saw my mother's eyes flick, just once, to the small shelf where she kept her jars of remedies, dried herbs, bitter roots, powders she used for fevers and stomach troubles. Her gaze was brief, almost nothing, but it planted something in me. Not a plan, not yet. Only the first notion that knowledge, even humble household knowledge, might be turned in a direction it was never meant to go. My mother's remedies were not mysterious in the way people like to pretend old medicines were. They were mostly common sense in jars. Peppermint for a sour stomach, comfrey for bruises, onion syrup for cough, mustard to draw heat into the skin when joints went stubborn. The shelf itself was just 2 planks my father nailed up years earlier, and the jars were mismatched, some with proper labels, some with only a scrap of paper tied on with string. Yet after that Sunday, I began to see the shelf the way you might see a locked chest, as something that held more than it showed. It started small, with my mother sending me to fetch what she needed. "Bring me the dried yarrow," she'd say, or the little jar with the ground ginger. I had fetched those things 100 times, but now, when my fingers touched the glass, I would think, a little more of one thing can soothe, a little more of another can burn. How thin is the line between help and harm? I did not say this out loud. I barely admitted it to myself. A decent girl did not imagine such questions. But I was no longer living in the safety where decency was enough. Morrow's visits became a kind of weather. You did not ask if he would come, only when. And like weather, he changed the air in the house even after he left. My father would return with his face set, jaw clenched. My mother would wash cups twice, as if scrubbing could remove the sound of Morrow's voice from the room. My sisters grew quieter too. Children know when adults are afraid, even if they cannot name the shape of it. One afternoon, near the end of winter, snow still clinging in dirty patches along the fence line, my youngest sister Martha came down with a fever. She was small and stubborn, forever darting between chores with a laugh, and seeing her limp in the bed made something in me tighten like a knot. My mother did what women did then. She kept Martha cool with damp cloths, coaxed broth between her lips, and watched the rise and fall of her chest as if she could will it steady. We had no doctor close by, not without paying coin we did not have. My father hovered at the door, useless, his hands opening and closing. That night, my mother finally said, "Elspeth, go to Mrs. Halloway." Mrs. Halloway lived a mile off, a widow with sharp eyes and a garden that looked as if it obeyed her out of fear. Some folks called her wise, others whispered uglier words. But when a child's skin burned and the usual tease did nothing, people found their courage and walked to her door. I went with a lantern, the cold biting at my cheeks. The snow squeaked under my boots. When Mrs. Halloway opened her door, warm air and the smell of dried plants spilled out, and I nearly cried from the comfort of it. She listened without interrupting. Then she turned to her shelves, real shelves, properly built, the jars arranged with a precision that felt like pride. She handed me a packet of bark shavings and a small bottle wrapped in cloth. "For the fever," she said. "A little in water. Little. You hear me? Not more because you're frightened." "I hear," I answered. She studied my face for a moment too long. "Your eyes are too old for your age," she said, and that startled me more than the cold had. "Who is pressing on your family?" I should have lied. I should have said hard times, bad crops, the usual. But my fear had worn a groove in me, and sometimes a groove becomes a channel that words run down. "Marorrow," I said, and the name tasted like rust. Mrs. Halloway's mouth tightened. "Ah," she replied as if she had been expecting it. "He presses on many." She did not ask more, and I did not offer. She only added as she tied the packet again, "People think the world is split between healers and harmers. It isn't. It's split between those who pretend their hands are clean and those who know what their hands can do." I carried her words home like a stone in my pocket. Martha's fever broke by morning. My mother's shoulders sagged with relief, and my father, who had spent the night pacing, sat heavily at the table and put his head in his hands. In the light of day, with my sister breathing evenly again, the house returned to its usual hum. Chores, hunger, mending, the endless small errands of staying alive. But I could not forget Mrs. Halloway's sentence. It lodged itself beside Marorrow's. "There are ways to settle accounts besides coin." 2 sentences, 2 hooks in the same wound. Spring came late. Mud replaced snow. The river swelled and ran loud, carrying branches and dead leaves along as if it were cleaning out the past. That was when Marorrow offered his solution. He came in the middle of the week when my father was out repairing a fence with a neighbor. My mother and I were alone in the kitchen, kneading dough. The smell of yeast was in the air, a living smell that usually made me feel calm. Not that day. Marorrow stood just inside the door, hat in hand, as if he were paying a call on a respectable family. He spoke about the rent in a voice that held no anger, which made it worse. Then he said he had a position for me, as he had hinted before, work in a household in the next county. It would settle your father's arrears, he said, and your girl would be fed, clothed, under a roof that does not leak. My mother's hands were covered in flour. She wiped them slowly on her apron, buying time. "What household?" she asked. Marorrow's smile was thin. "Mine," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The room seemed to tilt. My breath shortened. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to speak the word, no, like a knife. Instead, she asked very softly, "For how long?" That question, practical, measured, hit me harder than a slap, because it meant she was considering it. Not because she wanted to, because she was counting the cost of refusal. I felt something rise in me then, not bravery, not even anger, a kind of cold clarity. I saw, as if the air cleared, that if I went to Marorrow's house, I would not come back the same, if I came back at all. I saw my sisters growing up under his shadow, one by one offered up to settle whatever new debt he invented. I saw my father's pride rotting him from the inside until he did something desperate. I saw my mother folding herself smaller and smaller, calling it endurance. Marorrow kept talking, laying his terms on the table the way a butcher lays down meat. He was careful not to sound crude. He made it sound like employment, like charity even. And my mother, trapped between her child and her children, listened. I did something then that I had never done. I spoke directly to him. "I will not go," I said. The words came out calm. That calmness was not courage. It was the stillness of something that has already snapped. Marorrow's eyes flicked to me with open surprise, then amusement. "You don't decide," he said. I heard my mother inhale sharply. The dough sat half-kneaded on the board, a pale lump under her hands, like something unfinished and vulnerable. "You should leave," my mother said to Marorrow, and her voice shook despite herself. Marorrow did not move at once. He leaned in slightly, just enough that I could smell his tobacco again. "Think carefully," he murmured, and his tone turned intimate, as if he were sharing a secret. "A family can lose more than land." Then he straightened, set his hat back on his head, and walked out as smoothly as he had entered. My mother sank onto a chair as if her bones had turned to water. She covered her mouth with her hand, staring at the door. I did not sit. I went to the shelf of remedies without thinking, my eyes scanning the jars. Not because I knew what I would do, not because I had a plan that day. Only because some part of me understood, with a certainty that frightened me, that we had just refused a man who did not accept refusals. And in that moment, between the smell of yeast and the fading echo of his footsteps, I began to learn the terrible comfort of preparation. After we refused him, the days did not explode into drama the way stories like to do. They narrowed instead. The sky seemed lower. The air in the kitchen felt watched, as though the very seams between the boards had ears. My father came home that evening with mud on his boots and a rare tired softness in his face, until my mother told him what had been said. He did not shout. That would have been easier in a way. He went still. He stood with his hands on the back of a chair, knuckles whitening and his eyes fixed on nothing. "He wants the girl," my mother said, and the word "wants" sounded like something she had scraped up from the floor. My father's jaw worked. "He'll not have her," he replied, and his voice was low, as if he were speaking to a dangerous animal that might startle. Then came the part I did not expect. He turned that low voice on my mother. "Why did you let him speak it in our house?" My mother flinched. "Because he owns the land under our feet," she said. "Because you were gone. Because I can't move mountains with my bare hands." My father's face changed. Hurt, pride, shame, all braided together. He picked up his coat and walked out into the dusk without another word. I heard the yard gate latch, then unlatch again as he passed through. And after that, only the frogs beginning their spring song by the wet ditch. That night, my mother and I sat at the table long after my sisters had fallen asleep. The lamp burned low. The wick hissed. We did not speak at first. There are silences that are not empty. They are crowded with thoughts that have no safe place to land. Finally, my mother said, "Elspeth, you must promise me something." I waited. "If he comes when I am not here," she went on, "you go straight to Mrs. Halloway, or to the church, or to any neighbor with men in the yard. You do not try to be brave. Bravery is for those who can afford to be hurt." I nodded, but I felt the old stubborn thread in me tighten. It was not bravery I wanted. It was control over what happened to my body, my family, my life. When the world denies you lawful power, you start to notice other kinds. In the weeks that followed, my mother's remedy shelf became my private study. though I kept my hands off it unless I had reason. I watched what she used and how. I listened when she spoke to other women about who was sick, what helped, what didn't. I noticed how everyone treated Mrs. Halloway, with need in their faces and fear in their manners, the way people act around a tool they might someday require but do not wish to admit exists. Once, I walked to Mrs. Halloway's place again under the pretense of returning the bottle she had lent us. She took it, rinsed it, set it aside, all without hurry. Then she asked too casually, "How's your sister?" "Better," I said. "And how's your landlord?" Her eyes sharpened. I hesitated. "He's present," I answered, which made her snort softly. She motioned me closer to her table where she was sorting dried plants onto cloth. "Sit," she said. "If you're going to live where you live, you'll at least know what you're looking at." I did not understand at first what she meant, but she began naming things, not with grand talk, only plain instruction. Which leaf calmed the gut, which bark steadied a fever, which root was bitter enough to make a man spit but useful when the bowels locked tight. Then, without shifting her tone, she named other things, ones she kept farther back in jars with tighter lids away from children's fingers. "This one stirs the heart," she said, tapping a jar lightly. "This one dries the mouth and muddles the mind. This one—" She paused and looked at me until I met her gaze. "This one is not for curing. It is for ending." My throat went dry. "Why keep it at all?" I asked. "Because the world keeps wolves," she replied, "and because knowledge doesn't care what you call it. It sits there until a hand uses it." I realized then she was testing me, not for cruelty, but for steadiness. She wanted to see if I would flinch away and pretend I had not heard. I did not flinch. I felt sick, yes, but I stayed. "I'm not asking you to give me anything," I said, my voice thin. "I know," she answered, "and I'm not offering. I'm teaching. There's a difference." On my walk home, I kept my eyes on the road and my thoughts on my feet, as if the ground itself might judge me. The air smelled of lilac buds and wet earth. Life was pushing up green everywhere, shamelessly. And inside me, something darker had taken root beside that green. The understanding that ending was a kind of power. And power was what Marorrow traded in. Summer came, and with it, the work that never lets you sit, haying, mending harness, boiling laundry in the yard, canning what little we grew. We rose before dawn and stopped only when darkness made the tools useless. My hands grew rougher. My shoulders broadened. People said I was becoming a woman, as if womanhood were just a matter of bones and blood. Marorrow did not come for a time, which was not mercy. It was strategy. He let us begin to believe the refusal had held. My mother's face softened by a fraction. My father spoke more. I even caught myself laughing once, startled by the sound as if it belonged to another girl. Then, in late summer, the storekeeper's boy ran down our lane with his cap in his hands, breathless. "Mr. Marorrow wants your father in town," he blurted. "At the office. Said it's urgent." My father's shoulders tensed, but he tried to look calm. "I'll go," he said, and he took his hat without meeting my eyes. My mother watched him leave, then turned to me. "Get the bread started," she said too briskly. "Keep the girls busy." I did as told, but my hands moved clumsily. Flour dust rose and settled on my skin like pale ash. I kept hearing Mrs. Halloway's words, ending, wolves, knowledge, circling like crows. My father came home at dusk, and I knew before he spoke that something had happened. His face was gray with it. "He's calling the note," my father said. Says we're in arrears beyond what he'll carry. Says he'll take the livestock, the wagon, the seed for next year. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. We can't, she began. My father cut her off with a bitter laugh. He says there's still a way, he said, and his eyes finally found mine. He says if Elspeth comes to his house to work, he'll be generous. That was the word, generous. The kitchen seemed to lose air. My sisters, sensing trouble, went silent at the table. I heard myself say very quietly, he wants to make it look like I chose. My father looked as if he might weep, and that frightened me more than any anger. I won't sell you, he whispered, as if the words themselves were poison. I won't. And in that moment, I understood the shape of the trap. If my father refused, we might starve or be turned out. If he agreed, he would live the rest of his life knowing what he traded. Marorrow was not only after my body, he was after my father's soul. He wanted us all bent. My mother stood, went to the remedy shelf and reached for a jar. Only a simple one, something for the stomach, something harmless. But her hand trembled, and her eyes stayed on the darker corner where the tight-lidded jars would have been if she had owned such things. She did not take anything from that corner. She only stood there for a heartbeat too long, then turned back with the harmless jar in her hand, like a lie. That night, when the house finally fell quiet, I did not sleep. I lay listening to my sister's breathing and the distant howl of a dog. I thought of Marorrow's clean boots, his tidy words, his certainty. I thought of Mrs. Halloway's steady eyes. And I began, without fully admitting it, to assemble a question I would not have dared to form before. If a man can ruin you with paper and a smile, what can a woman do with something small, silent, and certain? The next day had the bright, careless look of late summer, the kind that makes you feel foolish for dreading anything. Sunlight lay across the yard. The hens scratched and muttered. My sisters argued over a ribbon as if the world had never invented ledgers. Even the river sounded friendly, chuckling over stones. Inside the house, we moved like people carrying a full bucket, careful, quiet, trying not to spill what little steadiness we had left. My father went to town again that morning. He said he would speak to the storekeeper, to a cousin, to anyone who might lend a sum large enough to keep Marorrow at bay. He did not say the sum out loud, but I knew it was beyond us. A debt like ours was not a single nail you pulled free. It was a whole board nailed down. My mother kept us busy. There is a kind of woman's command that sounds like ordinary instruction, but is really a spell. Keep your hands moving and your mind will not break. She had me scrub the floor, then peel apples for drying, then rinse jars for canning. She set my sisters to shelling beans. She spoke about winter stores, about lard and salt and flour, as if the only enemy we faced was cold. But every so often, her gaze slid toward the road, and she would pause with her hands in the water as if listening for hoofbeats. Near midday, a wagon came. Not Marorrow's fine carriage, a plain farm wagon, but the horse was well kept, and that told me enough. It stopped at our gate. The driver did not come in. He only called out that Mr. Marorrow would be visiting at dusk, and that my father should be present. My mother thanked him in a voice that did not belong to her, and the wagon rolled away, leaving ruts in our lane like scars. Dusk. The word hung in the kitchen as if it had weight. My mother's face looked carved from wood. He's making it formal, she said, and then to herself more than to me. He wants witnesses. Witnesses for what? I asked, though I already knew. Witnesses to our submission. Witnesses that would later say, with their tidy mouths, that the girl went of her own accord. My mother reached up to the remedy shelf, took down a jar of dried mint, and crushed a pinch between her fingers. The smell rose sharp and clean. For your father's stomach, she said, as if that were why she held it, but her eyes were far away. Ma, I whispered, we can't let him. She cut me off with a glance, not harsh, terrified. Don't speak it, she said. Not in the house. Words can become plans, and plans can leak. That afternoon stretched, long and thin. My sisters were sent to a neighbor's under the excuse of helping with quilting. When they left, skipping at first and then quieter when they sensed our mood, the house grew too open, too quiet. Even the flies at the window sounded loud. My father returned in the late light with emptiness in his hands. No loan, no mercy. He stood by the table and stared at the floorboards as if they might offer a hiding place. I tried, he said hoarsely. I tried until my mouth tasted like begging. My mother touched his arm once, a brief press of skin on cloth. We know, she said. Then the three of us, my father, my mother, and me, did something I will never forget. We arranged the kitchen as if we were preparing for company, because that is what Marorrow demanded. My mother set out cups. My father wiped the table. I cut a slice of bread and laid it on a plate. It felt obscene, offering hospitality to the person who was coming to take the shape of our lives and bend it. When the sun fell behind the trees, the air cooled quickly. Shadows filled the corners. My mother lit the lamp, and the yellow light made everything look older, even my own hands. Marorrow arrived just as the first bat started to flicker above the yard. He did not knock. He stepped in with the certainty of a man who had never been barred from any door he cared to enter. He brought someone with him, Mr. Pritchard, the town constable. Pritchard was not a cruel man, but he was the sort who believed order was always more important than justice. He nodded stiffly at us and stood near the doorway, hands clasped in front of him, as if he were attending a business meeting. Marorrow smiled, removed his hat, and glanced around our kitchen as though taking inventory. Evening, he said warmly. I'm glad you're all here. My father did not invite him to sit. Marorrow sat anyway. You've had time, Marorrow said, folding his hands. Time to consider. Time to see what's sensible. My father's voice came out rough. You're asking for my daughter. I'm offering a solution, Marorrow replied, and he turned slightly so Pritchard could hear every word. Your debts are substantial. Your landlord has been patient. Now he must be practical. My mother's nails dug into her apron. She is not a coin, she said. Marorrow's gaze flicked to her, amused. Madam, he said gently, coin is exactly what you lack, so you must trade in what you have. The constable shifted his weight, uncomfortable, but he didn't speak. Marorrow looked back at my father. The arrangement is simple, he said. Your girl comes to my house as a servant. She will have food and clothing. You will remain on the land. The note will be extended, perhaps reduced if I'm satisfied. And if we refuse? My father asked. Marorrow's smile remained. Then I take what the law allows, he said. Livestock, wagon, tools. And if that doesn't satisfy, eviction follows. Before the first hard frost, if need be. My father's shoulders sagged as if the words had physical force. He glanced at me, and in his eyes I saw the worst kind of apology, the kind that wants absolution it does not deserve. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. Instead, I heard myself speak with a calm that did not feel like mine. "I will not go," I said. Marorrow leaned back as if entertained. "And yet you will," he replied, then turned to Pritchard. "You see, they are being unreasonable." "I'm trying to help." Pritchard cleared his throat. "Mr. Crowley," he said to my father, "Mr. Marorrow is within his rights to call the note." My father's hands clenched. "Rights," he muttered, as if the word were a bitter herb. Marorrow's eyes returned to me. "Elspeth," he said, and he used my name like a hand on the back of my neck. "You're a sensible girl. You'll do what's best for your family." Something in me went very still. Not rage, not panic, decision. "I need to fetch water," I said, and I kept my voice ordinary, like a daughter asking permission to do a chore. My mother's eyes widened a fraction. She understood that I was stepping away from the table where the trap was tightening. She did not stop me. Perhaps she thought I meant to run to a neighbor. Perhaps she feared what I might do. Perhaps she could not bear to know. I took the bucket and went out into the yard. The evening air smelled of cooling earth and crushed grass. The well rope rasped against wood as I lowered the bucket, the sound steady as a heartbeat. And as I pulled the water up, I knew, with a clarity that frightened me, that I was not going to ask anyone to save me. I was going to save us, or I was going to ruin myself trying. When I carried the bucket back toward the house, the light from the kitchen window fell across my hands. In that pale glow, I saw them not as a girl's hands, but as tools, capable of gentleness, yes, and also of something else. Inside, Marorrow's voice floated out, calm and confident, as if the matter were already settled. When I stepped back into the kitchen, the lamp smoke and the smell of coffee struck me as sharply as a slap. Marorrow was still talking in that slow, reasonable way of his, turning my life into a matter of tidy sentences. My father stood with his shoulders rounded, as if the roof beam had come down onto his back. The constable lingered by the door, eyes drifting anywhere but mine. I set the water bucket down. The dull thud of it on the floor cut through Marorrow's voice for a moment. He looked at me, mildly irritated, like a man interrupted mid-sermon. "There," I said, and kept my tone as plain as bread. "Fresh water, if you'd like to wash your hands." It was a small offering, and that is why it worked. Men like Marorrow expect defiance to come with shouting or tears, or a scene they can dismiss as hysteria. They do not always know what to do with a girl who behaves as if she is already resigned. Marorrow's mouth curved. "A thoughtful habit," he said, and he rose, because he liked any excuse to be served. My mother moved too quickly as if to block me, but I was already at the shelf. I reached for a jar I truly did use sometimes, the one for stomach upsets, the one with the bitter powder my mother mixed into tea for cramps and queasiness. I took it down and set it on the table as though my only intention was comfort, not consequence. "You look peaked," I said to Marorrow. "Long day in town." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "My day is always long," he replied. My father stared at me as if he did not recognize me. My mother's face had gone very still. She saw the jar. She understood I had chosen a path, even if she did not know where it ended. Marorrow sat again, and this time he accepted the cup my mother poured without making a show of it. He wanted to appear generous in front of Pritchard, and generosity requires props. I picked up the jar and loosened the lid. The powder inside was fine, brown, and ordinary looking, like ground bark. I had watched my mother measure it before, small pinches, never heaping. I remembered Mrs. Halloway's warning, little, not more because you're frightened. It came back to me now in a twisted way. I was not frightened anymore. I was focused. I tipped a careful amount into the cup while my body blocked the view from the doorway. My hands did not shake. I stirred with a spoon, slow, letting the granules disappear into the dark surface. If you are waiting for me to name the substance, I won't. Not because I'm trying to be coy, but because even now I cannot bear to make it sound like a recipe. It was something a household could have, something that belonged near the line between remedy and ruin. It was not exotic. It was not magical. It was merely misused. I placed the cup in front of him with the same calm I might have used for any visitor. Drink, my mother said suddenly, and her voice cracked on the word, as if she were speaking to me, not him. Drink your coffee and go. Marorrow lifted the cup. His eyes stayed on mine as he swallowed, as if he wanted me to witness my own surrender. He drank more than once. He drank as a man drinks when he believes he is won. Pritchard cleared his throat. Mr. Marorrow, he said uneasily, if the agreement's made, perhaps we ought to... It's made when I say it's made, Marorrow answered, and he set the cup down. For a span of minutes, nothing happened. That is the cruel part. The world does not announce the instant it turns. My father shifted his weight. My mother's fingers worked at her apron hem until the fabric wrinkled. Outside, a cricket started its steady rasping, the same sound it would have made if this were any other evening. Marorrow spoke again, laying out the terms once more, slower, savoring them. He smiled at Pritchard as if they shared a sensible understanding. Then, mid-sentence, he paused and pressed his lips together. He frowned. Not with pain at first, more like annoyance, as if his own body had spoken out of turn. Your coffee's strong, he said, and tried to make it sound like a joke. My mother's face did not change. Mine did not either. I stood beside the table, hands folded, as if waiting for instruction. Inside, though, I was counting my own heartbeats because that was the only clock I had. Marorrow's complexion changed in small, untheatrical ways. A dampness at his forehead, a pallor around the mouth. He took a sip of water, then set the cup down too hard. Pritchard's eyes sharpened. Are you well, sir? Marorrow waved him off. A passing discomfort, he said, but his voice had lost its easy polish. My father took one step forward, then stopped. He looked at me again, and in his eyes I saw a terrible realization beginning, like a dawn he did not want. Marorrow stood. The chair legs scraped the floor. He put a hand on the table as if the room had shifted. His gaze flicked to the bucket, to the remedy jar, to my mother's rigid shoulders, and then finally to me. In that look, his confidence cracked. Not fully. Men like him cling to power like a drowning man clings to a plank, but enough that I saw something raw underneath. The first suspicion that he was not the only one who could decide outcomes. He opened his mouth as if to accuse me, then swallowed and pressed his palm against his middle, breathing through his nose. He tried to straighten, to regain his posture, because posture was part of his authority. My mother spoke, and it was the quietest thing she had said all day. Constable, she murmured. Mr. Marorrow looks faint. Pritchard stepped forward at last, not out of care for us, but because a respectable man falling in a tenant's kitchen was trouble of a kind he could not ignore. Marorrow shook his head, stubborn. "I'll go home," he said. The words came clipped, as if each one cost him effort. He took one step, then another, and his boot caught on the edge of a floorboard. He grabbed at the doorframe, fingers whitening, and for a moment, his face turned toward the lamplight. I can still see it, even now. Not agony, not drama, just the slow loss of command, as if some invisible hand were turning a key inside him and locking him out of his own body. Pritchard reached for his arm. "Let me fetch a doctor," he said. "No," Marorrow snapped, but the snap was weak. He insisted on walking. Pride carried him where strength could not. The constable followed him out, half supporting him, half escorting him like a man under arrest. When the door shut behind them, the kitchen seemed to exhale. My mother turned to me. She did not slap me. She did not cry out. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face, terror braided with understanding. "What did you do?" she whispered. My father sank into the chair Marorrow had used, his hands trembling as if they belonged to someone else. He stared at the cup, at the faint ring of coffee left inside, and then at me. I wanted to tell them it would be all right. I wanted to say I had only meant to frighten him, to weaken him enough that he would retreat. But I could not lie, not then. "I made him stop," I said, and in the hush that followed, with the lamp sputtering and the cricket still rasping outside, we all understood the same thing. There are acts you cannot pull back once they have begun to move through the world. For a little while after they left, none of us moved. My mother stood with her hands braced on the table, as if the wood were the only thing keeping her upright. My father remained in that chair, staring at the cup like it might speak. The lamp flame trembled, and its light made the shadows jump on the walls, nervous as rabbits. Then my mother did something so ordinary it nearly undid me. She picked up the cup and carried it to the wash basin. "Don't," I blurted, and my voice came out sharper than I meant. She froze. She looked at the cup, then at me. "What do you want me to do, Elspeth?" she asked, and the question held no anger, only the raw edge of a person whose world has just tilted. "Set it on the mantel like a trophy?" I had no answer. She washed it anyway, slowly, with a steadiness that felt like refusal to break. Soap, water, a rinse. She scrubbed as if cleanliness could make the act disappear. My father finally spoke, his voice small in the big quiet. Is he going to die?" I felt my throat tighten. I could have told them a comforting lie. I could have pretended I had used only something to loosen a man's bowels, to embarrass him, to send him home humbled and alive. But my life had already split into before and after. There was no room left for lies that would not hold. "I don't know," I said. "I think it can be—" I stopped, because even saying the word can make my stomach turn. "I think it can be fatal." My mother's eyes closed for a moment. When she opened them, they shone, but she did not let tears fall. "Lord help us," she whispered, and it did not sound like a plea so much as an acknowledgement that help was far away. We sent my sisters to bed without explanation. My mother kissed their foreheads and told them it had been a long day. I stood in the doorway and watched my sisters' faces in the dim, the soft trust in them, and my guilt rose like heat. I had done what I did for them, yes, that was the truth. But I had also done it because I could not bear the thought of being traded like a sack of grain. Two truths can live in one act, and both can cut. After the girls slept, my father went out into the yard and stood in the dark, looking toward the road as if he might see our fate coming by lantern light. My mother sat at the table and began to mend a tear in a towel that did not need mending. She stitched to keep her hands from shaking. And I, foolish, stubborn, I listened. In the distance toward town, I imagined I could hear hooves, the rush of a wagon, the shout of men. Most of it was only my mind inventing sound. But once, much later, I did hear a wagon pass fast on the road, wheels rattling hard, and I felt my blood turn cold. My father stepped inside again, his face pale. "That'll be for him," he said. "Doctor, maybe." He said doctor as if it were a prayer. "We own no doctor. Marorrow could summon one like you summon a tool." The night wore on, and with every hour I learned something I had not understood. When I set the cup down, doing a terrible thing does not bring relief. It brings a new kind of waiting with your eyes open. Near dawn, there was a knock, not at the door, at the window, a soft tap, like a cautious fingernail. My mother startled so hard she nearly overturned the lamp. My father moved between us and the glass, as if his body could stop what was coming. It was not the constable. It was a boy from town, the same one who ran messages. His face looked pinched in the gray light. "Mr. Crowley," he whispered through the crack my father opened. "Mr. Marorrow took sick in the night, bad sick. They sent for the doctor from over by Grange Hill. Constable Pritchard says you're to come in and answer questions." My father's mouth opened, then shut. His eyes flicked to me. In them I saw a father's instinct, protect the child. Even as the world demanded he do the opposite. "Tell him I'll come," my father said. The boy nodded and fled down the lane as if chased. My mother turned to me, and I saw in her face the decision she did not want to make. "You won't go," she said. "You'll stay here." "They'll ask about me," I replied. "They'll ask," she said. "But they won't see you? Not yet." My father pulled on his coat with hands that shook. Before he stepped out, he looked at me as if he were trying to memorize me, in case this was the last moment he had the right. "Did he touch you?" he asked suddenly, the question rough as gravel. I flinched, not from shame, but from the sorrow in it. "No," I said, "not yet." My father's eyes filled and he blinked hard. "Then I failed you anyway," he whispered, and he left before I could answer. After he was gone, my mother and I worked like women possessed, not in panic. Panic makes mistakes, but with the grim precision of people who know the world will try to name them guilty no matter the truth. We cleaned. We put away the remedy jars and wiped the shelf. We aired the kitchen. My mother even swept the hearth as if ashes had opinions. She instructed me, calmly, on what to say if anyone asked. Marorrow came. He drank coffee. He complained of his stomach. He left. No more. No extra detail. Extra detail is where you hang yourself. "And if they ask about powders?" I asked. My mother's mouth tightened. "Then we say what is true," she replied. "That I keep remedies for my children. That I've treated fevers and coughs for years. That there's nothing wicked in caring for your own." She did not say there's nothing wicked in what you did. She could not. By midday, my father returned. His face was gray and dust clung to his boots. He sat without removing his hat, which told me how his mind had shaken loose. "He's alive," my father said, and my mother let out a sound that might have been a sob swallowed whole. "But he's..." changed, weak. The doctor says it was a poisoning, maybe from bad spirits, maybe from something he took. Pritchard asked about our coffee. I told him we serve what we have. I felt my stomach twist. Alive meant questions could continue. Alive meant Marorrow could point a finger. Did he? I began. My father shook his head. Marorrow spoke only a little, he said. But when he did, he said one thing, plain as a nail. My mother leaned forward. What? My father looked at me. He said he'll remember, he murmured. And he said, when he's well enough, he'll collect what he's owed in a different way. That was when I understood what my act had bought us. Not freedom, time. And time, I learned, can be the most expensive thing in the world because it gives consequences room to grow. So we lived on borrowed time, and you should know what that means in a poor household. You still milk the cow, still mend the hem, still lift the same pail of water, but every ordinary task has a second sound underneath it, a quiet counting. How many days until he stands in our doorway again? How many nights until a wagon stops at the gate? How long before the town decides what story it prefers? Marorrow stayed out of sight for a spell. People said he had taken to his bed. People said his skin had a strange color, that he could not keep broth down, that the doctor from Grange Hill shook his head and blamed bad drink or tainted victuals. People like simple causes. A wicked man felled by his own indulgence is a story that lets everyone sleep. But I did not sleep. I carried my secret the way some women carry a child they cannot name yet, always aware of it, always guarding it, always frightened it would show through my clothes. When I washed dishes, I watched the water swirl down the drain and thought of how easily evidence can vanish. When I kneaded bread, I thought of hands as instruments, capable of feeding and ending with the same calm motions. And when I heard footsteps on the road, my heart would pitch forward, certain it was the day my life would be called in. My father tried in his way to repair what had been broken. He went to town more often. He spoke to men he once would have avoided. Pride is a hard god, but fear can topple it. He arranged a payment plan with the storekeeper for flour and salt. He even spoke to a cousin about taking us in if the worst came. Yet every plan ended at the same wall. Marorrow held the paper, and paper, when stamped and signed, can outweigh a family. Then autumn came, and with it the first cold that smells like iron. On a Thursday, yes, I remember the day of the week because my mother was boiling laundry and the whole yard smelled of soap. Constable Pritchard rode up again. He did not enter at once. He stood outside by the gate, clearing his throat, as if the air itself might give him permission. He looked older than he had that summer, or perhaps I simply saw him more clearly now. A man who wanted to be decent and had accepted a role that asked him not to be. My father went to him. They spoke in low voices. I could not hear the words, only the tone, official, careful. My mother kept stirring the pot, though the clothes had long since stopped kneading it. Her spoon made a steady circle, like a clock hand. When my father came back, his face was set in a way that meant he had swallowed something bitter. What is it? My mother asked. He's amended the note, my father said. Reduced it. My mother's spoon stopped. Why? She demanded. Because we had learned to distrust gifts from men like Marorrow. My father glanced at me, then away. Because he's leaving, he said. Selling some holdings. Moving his operations west, they say, near the rail line. He wants clean accounts before he goes. I felt my knees go weak with relief, so sharp it was almost pain. Leaving. The word tasted like sunlight after long sickness. If he left, perhaps the pressure would lift. Perhaps the story would end without punishment. But my father's face did not carry relief. It carried dread. There's a condition, he added. My mother's jaw tightened. Of course there is. My father's voice dropped. He wants to see Elspeth, he said. Once, at his house, before he goes. He says he has a matter to settle privately. Pritchard brought the message. My mother stepped forward as if struck. No, she said, and the single word held more force than any prayer she had spoken that year. No, we will not send her there. My father's eyes shone. He says if she doesn't come, the reduction is off. The eviction proceeds. And he says, my father swallowed hard. He says he'll speak openly about the night he took sick. He'll say we tried to kill him. My mother turned her head as if the yard had suddenly spun. I realized then what Marorrow truly was. Not a beast, not even merely a predator. He was a man who understood leverage the way a carpenter understands joints. He could make any piece fit his design. All day we argued in whispers so my sisters would not hear. My mother insisted we run, tonight, now, with what we could carry. My father said running would confirm guilt in every tongue from our valley to the next. I said little, because the truth was this. I could not bear to let my family be ruined for what I had done, and I could not bear to walk into Marorrow's house alone. In the end, the decision came not from reason, but from the shape of my mother's face as she looked at my sisters playing in the dirt, carefree as sparrows. I'll go, I said. My mother gripped my wrist so tightly her nails left half moons. Elspeth, she hissed, don't you... I'll go, I repeated, and my voice held the same cold clarity it had held in the kitchen that night. But not alone. You come with me. My mother's eyes widened. He won't allow? Then we don't go at all, I said. Let him choose which story he wants to tell. My father stared at me as if I had grown taller. He nodded once, slow. We'll go together, he said, all three, and we'll take witnesses of our own. So, on the following evening, just as the light began to thin, we walked down the road toward Marorrow's house with Mr. Pritchard riding behind us and Mrs. Halloway, yes, her, keeping pace at a distance, her shawl pulled tight, her eyes sharp as tacks. My father had swallowed his pride and asked her to come. She did not say yes with words. She simply appeared because she understood, as women sometimes do, when another woman is walking into a room where her life may be negotiated. Marorrow's house sat on higher ground than ours, painted white, with a porch that looked out over fields like a judge's bench. When we were shown into his front room, the air smelled of polish and cold ash. Marorrow sat in a chair near the fire, a blanket over his knees, though the room was not that cold. He looked smaller than I remembered. His cheeks had hollowed, and his eyes had a restless brightness, like a candle in a draught. He dismissed the servant. He looked at the constable. You may wait outside, he said. Pritchard hesitated, then went. My father shifted, ready to follow, but Marorrow raised a hand. No, Marorrow said to him, and then he looked at my mother. No, he said again, softer, and it sounded almost like respect. I invited the girl, but I see you've brought your walls with you. My mother did not sit. She stood with her hands folded. and the folds were tight enough to whiten her knuckles. Morrow's gaze fixed on me. "You," he said, and there was no warmth now, only recognition. I knew it the moment the cup went down. You have the face of a person who can do a thing and not flinch. My stomach turned, but I kept my voice even. "What do you want?" Morrow gave a dry little laugh. "Want?" he repeated. "I wanted obedience. I wanted easy power. And you gave me something else." He paused, breathing carefully as if speaking cost him. "I've been dying," he said, then corrected himself with a faint sneer. "Or half dying, which is worse. Slowly. Day by day, weaker. Do you know what that teaches a man?" I did not answer. "It teaches him what he is," Morrow said. "Not the boots, not the ledger, just flesh." My father made a sound, half disgust, half pity, and then bit it off. Morrow's eyes drifted to my mother. "You were willing to bargain, your girl," he said, and my mother's chin lifted like a blade. "I was willing to keep my children alive," she replied. "You mistook that for consent." Morrow's mouth tightened. He looked back to me. "I could ruin you," he said, almost conversationally. "I still might, but I am leaving, as you've heard. I'm taking what I can carry, and I am tired." He reached to a side table and slid a folded paper toward my father. "Reduced note," he said. "Signed. Witnessed. If you leave now, you keep your land for the term. You keep your cow. You keep your winter." My father did not touch it. "Why?" he demanded, voice thick. "Why give this after what you tried to do to us?" Morrow's eyes narrowed. "Because I do not forget," he said, "and because I do not forgive. This is not kindness. It is terms." He tapped the paper once with a finger that trembled slightly. "I will go. I will not speak about the night I fell ill. I will let you live as if it never happened," he said. "But you will also let me go as if nothing happened. No accusation, no confession, no whisper to the church ladies. If my name is dragged, yours will be dragged with it." My mother's voice came out low and fierce. "You're blackmailing us with our own shame." Morrow smiled faintly. "Shame is an excellent rope," he said. Then his face tightened and he pressed his hand to his middle, breathing through his nose until the moment passed. When he looked up again, his eyes held something like grudging honesty. "I came here to see what you'd do," he said to me. "If you'd tremble, if you'd beg, if you'd try to bargain like a girl. But you brought your mother and father, and you brought that widow who scares half the county." His gaze flicked past us, as if he sensed Mrs. Halloway's presence even through walls. "So I see it plain. You're not alone. That makes you dangerous." I stood very straight. "Then leave," I said, "and never come back." For a long moment, he stared at me, and I felt again that old sensation of being measured like cloth. But now I was not cloth. I was the one holding the scissors. Finally, he nodded once, slow, as if conceding a point. "Very well," he murmured. "Take your paper. Take your little life. And keep your silence." My father snatched the document up as if it might vanish. My mother did not thank Morrow. She only looked at him with a contempt so clean it made me ache. We left without another word. Outside, the air tasted of wood smoke and the coming frost. Pritchard mounted his horse. Mrs. Halloway fell into step beside me as we walked back down the road, and she spoke only once, her voice quiet enough that my parents could not hear. "You see," she said, "power always wants a witness. Tonight, you brought your own." In the years after, we stayed on that land until my father's lease ended and a kinder man bought the holdings. Marorrow's name faded the way some names do, first spoken less, then spoken as rumor, then not spoken at all. I married later than most. I bore children. I baked bread for weddings and sat up with neighbors' fevers and buried a daughter of my own in a year when sickness swept through like a scythe. Life did what it does. It piled new sorrows on old ones until the old ones learned to hide under the stack. But my secret never became light. I did not confess to a priest. I did not whisper it to my husband in the dark. I carried it alone because I knew the difference between a sin you commit out of malice and a sin you commit out of refusal to be broken. And I feared people would only hear the first. And because, if I am honest, I wanted the story to die with me, the way a fever dies when it has no new body to enter. Yet here I am, speaking to you. Why now? Because I have reached the age where the past stops being behind you and starts standing beside your bed. Because my hands shake and my breath is shorter, and I can feel the door at the end of the hall. And because I have come to believe that silence is not always virtue. Sometimes it is only fear with good manners. So let me tell you the truest thing I know. The night I set that cup down, I did not become a devil. I became a person who discovered what she was capable of when cornered. And that knowledge, more than any punishment the law might have devised, has been my lifelong sentence. If you take anything from my confession, take this. Do not let your life be arranged by those who speak softly and call it sensibility. Do not let your decency be used as a leash. And if ever you find yourself thinking you have no power, look around for who is insisting you stay alone. That is how they win. And that is, at last, why I have told you.